Is that flag rope clicking, or just time keeping score again? The sound echoed through the hangar, while dawn scraped silver across the floor. They scoffed. It's just a ring, old man. Laughter pressed against the tin walls, small and mean like rain before the storm. Still, the metal caught one thread of light, and the air went quiet. His thumb brushed the engraving, a heartbeat between memory and duty. Anyway, quiet men leave echoes too. And sometimes one ring keeps a whole sky honest. The afternoon light lingered over Nora Lee's cafe, painting the new plaque in soft gold. Steam rose from Frank Callan's cup as he watched Eli tighten the final screw beneath the framed photo and the replica ring. The room carried that Sunday hush between hymns, the kind that sounds like gratitude wearing silence. Still, every clink of the hammer seemed to echo last night's salute across the glass. Then a boy outside pressed his hand to the window and mimed the gesture he'd seen. Frank smiled, eyes bright. The flag beyond the porch caught the light and folded once in the wind, a quiet proof of its own. Sometimes the quietest symbols carry the loudest honor. The ring on his hand gleamed softly, more memory than metal, just enough to remind the town that some salutes never fade. If this story moved, you share it forward. The dawn over Cedar Ridge Airfield came thin and silver, cutting through the fog that still clung to the grass. Inside the open hangar, Frank Callan, 62 and steady, wrapped the flag rope around his palm. The air smelled of oil coffee and the metal tang of a long-forgotten runway. His old thermos hissed a curl of steam beside the toolbox. He tugged once, checking the knot habit born from years when knots could mean life or loss. A pair of younger volunteers leaned on a wing strut nearby. Their voices carried like loose bolts in the quiet. "Look at that thing on his hand," one said. "It's just a ring, old man," the other added, half laughing. Frank heard them but didn't turn. The ring caught the morning light, a dull gold circle with the engraving half worn away. He'd stopped polishing it years ago. Shine didn't make meaning. He lifted the flag, the rope rough against his palm, and the cloth unfurled with a sound like a breath remembered. Still, the hangar breathed with him, rafters sighing, as if they'd heard this ritual 1,000 times. He tied the line to the cleat, stepped back, and saluted, slow, measured, as the radio crackled behind him, with the low hum of a local choir's Veterans Day broadcast. A thin speaker made the harmony wobble, yet the voices stayed kind. Morning Captain called a mechanic from across the field. "Need a hand?" "No thanks," Frank replied, voice even. "Just keeping the rope honest." The younger men drifted away, mumbling something about paper medals and old rules. Their laughter faded into the clatter of folding chairs, but the old hangar still breathed. He reached for his thermos, took a sip that burned the edge of his throat, and watched the sun slide higher. Every beam of light turned the dust into tiny parades. For a moment, the quiet almost felt like company. His left thumb brushed the ring again, tracing the nick near the crest. The metal was cold, almost shy of its own story. Once long ago, someone had said it would never tarnish. Turns out, even promises pick up weather. The radio cracked, a thin voice cutting through static. "Cedar Ridge Control, this is Base Command. Admiral Benton confirmed arrival. Repeat. Admiral Benton confirmed arrival at 1000. Frank froze halfway to his toolbox. Benton. The name rolled back through time to 69, to the airbase where the Admiral had pinned those wings and mentioned a protocol nobody followed anymore. The Admiral 69 protocol paperwork ceremony, or maybe something heavier. It wasn't talked about much. Maybe that was why it still stung. He exhaled slowly, eyes on the flag that caught the first full blaze of sunlight. The fabric shimmered, and for an instant so did the ring. He set down his coffee, checked the radio dial, a reflex more than a need, and let the hum settle into his chest. Outside, the young volunteers were lining up chairs for the fly-in crowd, unaware that the old man they'd laughed at had once logged more hours in the sky than they had on the ground. Frank adjusted his jacket collar, brushed the dust from the patch that read Callan, wings retired, and whispered to no one. "All right, Admiral. Let's see if you still remember protocol." The flag rope fluttered against the pole, and the choir reached the verse about coming home. Somewhere between the echo and the wind, the ring caught fire again, just memory, just light, but enough. The hangar smelled of coffee and solder again. Morning light spilled across the floor, catching every oil sheen like ripples on still water. Frank Callan crouched beside the old beacon radio, a tangle of wires and patience spread before him. His hands moved slow, deliberate, the way a man works when time has stopped demanding anything new. Eli Ward ducked under the wing, wiping his palms on a rag that had long given up being clean. At 27, he still carried the quick energy of someone trying to prove he belonged. "You sure this relic's worth fixing?" Sir Frank looked up, one brow lifting. The ring on his hand flashed as he turned a screw. "Relics keep the sky honest," he said. "Same reason we still salute poles instead of screens." Eli smiled, the kind of smile that hides more questions than it answers. He watched Frank twist the tuning knob. The radio hissed, coughed, then settled into a faint pulse. "Coffee never tastes right before a flight," Frank murmured. "I wouldn't know, never flown anything higher than a stepladder." Frank chuckled, a low, steady sound that warmed the chill air. The old mentor tone carried a rhythm of reassurance, half radio, half memory. A screwdriver clicked against the metal casing, each sound measured. The dust danced through a beam of light that cut across the floor. Eli noticed how the particles floated weightless but certain of their place. Maybe that's what discipline looked like when it stopped wearing a uniform. Still, the air hummed with static between the frequencies. "Hear that?" Frank asked, leaning close to the speaker. "It's like breathing for machines. They just do it so we remember to." Eli nodded, not sure whether to answer or just listen. In the soft gaps of noise, he could almost hear the hangar itself sigh. He reached for the toolbox, setting a wrench beside Frank's coffee thermos. That's when he saw the ring again, its dull edge catching a blade of light. Inside the band, just visible when Frank flexed his hand, were tiny words etched deep by time: Benton and Callan, 92, still flying. Eli blinked. He hadn't expected a story carved where no one could see it. "You ever think of getting that polished?" he asked, casual as he could. Frank didn't look up. He tightened another bolt. "Polish changes shine, not history," he said. "Besides, it reminds me who signed the flight plan." The younger man hesitated. "Who's Benton?" A pause stretched between them, long enough for the radio's hum to fill the space. "Old friend Frank," said finally. "Or maybe just old duty." Eli studied the older man's face, the calm that sat behind the crow's feet lines. No bitterness, no need to defend. Only that quiet discipline again, the kind that made younger Finn stop talking for fear of breaking something invisible. The static rose, then dipped. Frank adjusted the dial, nodding slightly. "Signal's clear," he said. "Guess she just needed a steadier hand." Or maybe she was waiting for the right frequency, Eli offered. Frank almost smiled. Could be. Machines listen better than people most days. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of electricity and the slow clink of tools finding their place again. Outside, wind teased the hangar doors, slipping through like another voice joining the conversation. Still, the engraving lingered in Eli's mind: Benton and Callan, 92, still flying. He repeated it silently, as if the phrase itself might unlock the quiet between them. Some stories didn't need permission to start. They just waited for someone young enough to ask the next question. Frank set the thermos beside him, the steam curling toward the rafters. "Let's call it tuned," he said. "Tomorrow's forecast depends on clear signals." Eli nodded, eyes still on the ring. He didn't press further. Not yet. But somewhere between the static and the silence, a bridge had already begun to build. Afternoon light poured through the hangar doors, turning the dust into bright confetti over rows of folding chairs. The memorial fly-in rehearsal was supposed to be simple: one flag pass, one salute, one small slice of pride. Frank Callan stood beside the vintage trainer aircraft cap, tucked under his arm jacket, pressed through the patches had long faded. Across the tarmac, Harold Mays, the town's safety bureaucrat, adjusted his clipboard like it held rank. "Captain Callan," he began, too loud for the size of the crowd. "Command's decided to cancel your flyby. New protocol requires digital control certification." The volunteers fell quiet. Eli froze mid-step, wrench still in his hand. "Sir, it's a ceremonial loop," Eli said. "He's done it every year." Mays didn't look at him. His gaze stayed on Frank's jacket, then dropped to the tarnished ring. "Regulations don't bend for nostalgia," Mays said. "Let's not risk the field or the insurance." A few people snickered from the folding chair rows. Someone whispered, "Guess he can't handle modern controls." The words hung there sharp and thin as wire. Frank's expression didn't change. He simply nodded once and looked up at the flag snapping above the hangar. But the air felt heavier. The teens near the bleachers muttered phones already raised. One of them said it louder this time. He never flew real combat anyway. Laughter, nervous and quick, rolled across the hangar. The phone caught every word. Eli's jaw tightened. His voice came low. "You want to say that again?" The boy shrugged, stepping back. "Just repeating what everyone knows." For a moment, the only sound was the wind pushing against the hangar doors. Then Frank spoke, calm even. "Let it be sun." But they let it be. He picked up the folded flag from its stand, brushed a line of dust from the fabric, and handed it to Eli. "Every year the flag goes up," Frank said quietly. "Doesn't matter who's holding the rope." His voice carried just enough to reach the first row of chairs. A few heads bowed without meaning to. Still, Eli could feel the outrage burn through his chest. The man beside him had logged hours these kids couldn't imagine, yet here he was dismissed by a form. The bureaucrat cleared his throat. "We'll replace your segment with a drone salute. Faster, safer." Frank nodded once, not trusting the words that wanted to rise. He turned toward the plane fingers grazing the cold metal along the fuselage. Memory flashed a younger crew, the same call sign painted brighter, Benton's laugh through the headset. Then the lights overhead flickered once, twice, like the past, tapping its own microphone. Silent beat. Wind gathered outside, rustling the flags at the gate. Far out over the ridge, a line of dark clouds stitched itself together. Frank looked toward them and said softly, "Storms early this year." Eli followed his gaze. "Yeah," he muttered. "Feels like it's been building a while." The radio on the workbench crackled, catching the edge of static that sounded almost like a voice trying to break through. Sir Eli asked. "Just interference," Frank said, but his eyes stayed on the clouds. The wind pushed harder against the hangar doors, rattling the metal, until even the bureaucrat paused to look. Frank stood steady, ring glinting in the strange light, the same old salute waiting quietly in his posture. Then the lights flickered again, like the past calling back. The storm came fast, drumming against the tin roof, until every rivet in the hangar seemed to shiver. Power cut with a hollow click. The beacon light died mid-pulse. The air filled with the scent of rain and metal, that strange mix of earth and memory. Frank Callan stood by the open panel, a small flashlight clenched between his teeth. Hands steady even as the wind howled through the doors. He worked by instinct now, wiring solder sequence like rebuilding something older than himself. But the dark carried a voice of its own. He could hear the storm breathing around the hangar, testing its frame. Somewhere inside the static of rain on steel, another sound flickered, a soft radio hum, faint and pulsing like a heartbeat long forgotten. The door creaked open. Eli's flashlight cut through the gloom, jittering across tool benches and spare wings. "You're still here," Frank didn't turn. Couldn't leave her blind. "You mean the beacon, I mean duty." The words settled heavier than thunder. Eli moved closer, stepping over puddles that mirrored the emergency lights from town. "Sir, everyone's gone. The field's shut down. You should be resting." "I know." Frank smiled faintly. "Thing is, I'm not tired. Just pushed by duty." The phrase hung in the damp air, his version of slammed by protocol. Lightning flashed, filling the hangar with white fire. For a second, the photo tacked behind the beacon panel glowed visible. A younger crew, 4 men in flight suits, Admiral Benton at center. Eli leaned closer, water dripping from his sleeve. "That's you on the left." Frank nodded. "And that ring?" "It wasn't mine then." He reached into the open panel, pulling free a small plastic pouch. Inside, beneath the wiring, was a faded photo corner and the edge of a torn patch. "He wore it," Frank said quietly. "Lieutenant Harris. Benton's best pilot. He promised to bring it home after the last run. He didn't make it." Frank's jaw moved once before words followed. Fire in the engine. Battle of memory, I guess. I kept it because he couldn't. Eli swallowed hard, the rain tapping faster. So Benton knew. He signed the report. Never said a word after. Guess some debts stay quiet until someone salutes them again. Thunder cracked above them. The flashlight flickered, then died. For a heartbeat, they stood in total dark. Only the hum from the old beacon remained, a low, steady rhythm like breath underwater. Then the radio came alive, speaker sputtering through static command. Benton copies the signal. Eli's eyes widened. "Sir, did you just know?" Frank said, almost smiling. "Guess the storm found the right frequency." They listened as the voice faded, replaced by soft, white noise. The power hummed back through the line. Lights blinked, hesitant, then steady. The storm began to soften, rain tapering to quiet drops. Silent beat. Frank leaned against the wing strut, exhaustion finally catching up. The ring, slick with rain, gleamed faintly gold in the returning light. "You think he heard you?" Eli asked. Frank looked at the beacon, still blinking in its new rhythm. "Doesn't matter," he said. "He's home either way." Lightning flashed one last time, far away now, like a memory waving goodbye. The signal kept singing long after the storm ended. Morning returned softer than anyone expected. The storm had rinsed the airfield clean. Puddles glimmered under a pale November sun. The flag hung damp but proud against the breeze. Folding chairs lined the tarmac again, and this time the seats filled early, curious faces, hushed voices, the quiet guilt of people who had seen too much of last night's video. Frank Callan adjusted the collar of his faded jacket. He looked older in the daylight, but steadier too, like the hangar itself had lent him its backbone. Eli passed him a cup of coffee, steam curling between them. "Guess even coffee salutes you today," Eli said, half grinning. "Only if it's hot enough," Frank answered. The humor landed gently, a neighborly ripple through the tension. The announcer's microphone cracked once, then steadied. "Please rise for the Veterans Day recognition fly in." But before the band could strike its note, a convoy of black cars rolled up beside the hangar. Doors opened, and an officer stepped out. A tall man, silver-haired posture, straight as memory. Someone in the crowd whispered, "That's Admiral Benton." The Admiral scanned the field, then walked toward Frank with deliberate steps. The brass on his coat caught the sunlight flashing, like Morse code from another era. Every conversation fell quiet. He stopped in front of Frank. Neither man spoke. Benton's gaze drifted down to the ring, dull from years of service worn smooth by time. "You kept it," Benton said finally. Frank's voice came steady, "because he couldn't." The Admiral nodded once, a movement that carried the weight of everything unspoken. Then slowly he raised his right hand in salute. The band froze. Even the wind paused to listen. For a heartbeat only the flags moved, rippling against the blue, as if stirred by the gesture itself. The Admiral's arm held firm. Frank answered the salute, the ring flashing one pure note of light. Eli stood beside them, eyes wide. Across the crowd, phones lowered, hats came off. A child near the front, small enough to barely see above the rail, lifted a toy ring from a keychain and mimicked the motion. The tiny hand trembled, but stayed raised. Community echo ignited one by one. The townspeople followed a silent chain of salutes, stretching from hangar to field. No order given, no anthem cued, just quiet justice finding its way home. Then the radio by the hangar hummed back to life. A familiar anthem spilled out, thin, static, kissed, but clear enough to lift every face toward the sound. "Thought that transmitter was fried," Eli whispered. Frank smiled faintly. "Maybe duty fixed it." Benton lowered his arm, voice low. "He'd be proud, Captain. So would you, Admiral." Their handshake was brief, formal, but it carried decades of unfinished conversations. The band, realizing its cue, began again softly. Trumpets rose behind the rustle of flags. Applause tried to form, then faded, replaced by something gentler. Silent beat. The only sound was wind passing through the flags like breath between two generations. Frank looked at the child, still saluting. The boy grinned, ring toy glinting like proof. Frank nodded once, eyes bright. "That's the right frequency," he murmured. And for a long moment, the airfield stood united, not by command or ceremony, but by memory, humming steady through every open frequency. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of Nora Lee's cafe, glazing every table in amber. The storm was 2 days gone, but its quiet had stayed behind, like the hum of an old radio that refuses to turn off completely. The air smelled of coffee, pine polish, and something calm. Along the far wall, Eli Ward was mounting the new plaque. He worked carefully, measuring twice before tightening each screw. Beneath the bronze plate hung a framed photo of 4 pilots and a replica ring resting in a small glass case. The engraving on the plaque read, "Admiral Benton saluted in silence 2022, for those who flew quiet." The hammer clicks echoed softly across the cafe. Each one felt like punctuation to the story the town had learned only yesterday. Outside, flags fluttered lazily against a clear November sky. At the window table, Frank Callan sat with a fresh cup of coffee steaming between his palms. The sunlight caught his ring, now polished only by time and movement. His reflection in the glass looked lighter somehow, the lines around his mouth easing, as though a weight had shifted just enough to let grace in. "All done," Eli said, stepping back. Straight enough to fly," Frank replied. Eli smiled. "They're already talking about naming the next fly-in after you." "Don't," Frank said gently. "Name it after the quiet ones. The ones nobody filmed." He lifted his cup and took a slow sip. The warmth spread steady as the beacon light outside the hangar used to be. The cafe's radio played softly, the same anthem that had hummed through static during the salute. "Hard to believe it's the same ring they laughed at," Eli said. Frank looked down at it, tracing the faint engraving with his thumb. The letters caught the light like memory resurfacing. "Guess it was never just a ring," he said. The phrase carried through the air like a benediction, soft enough that the nearest table fell silent. Eli set a small sugar packet beside him. "You think Benton will come back next year?" Frank shrugged. "Maybe. But the salute's already here. You can feel it." Outside, a breeze nudged the porch flag so that it shifted once caught the sun and stilled. A child passing with his mother pointed at the cafe plaque, tugging her sleeve. She smiled, whispered something, and the boy raised his hand in a small salute before running on. The motion caught Frank's eye. He chuckled under his breath, half to himself. "Sometimes the quietest symbols carry the loudest honor," he murmured. "Replay trigger equals 15 words." The light through the window thinned toward gold. The ring gleamed once more before the shadows softened around it. For a long while, neither man spoke. The radio faded into static, then into silence. Frank looked out across the porch where sunlight touched the flag's edge like a closing note. His voice lowered, steady and grateful. "If this story moved you, share it forward."